actually, I want to start with commenting on a couple of the questions because they're so present. One about the heterogeneity of community is that I am incredibly thankful for having had the opportunity to work with and in community in the realm of HIV because of the mind expansion that has happened for me. Like the opening of my eyes, the sort of bursting of preconceptions, the knowledge that I've gained from the diversity of the communities that I've had the opportunity to work with has been incredible. So a lot of it is really about listening to who's in front of you and who's with you, and having that conversation built up from the ground of like what's going on with the people there. So I think that's an incredible point. The other about community literacy among scientists in the academy, I think one of the things we have to look at is how are young scientists educated about community, and how is community work included in their upbringing into the scientific world. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done there, but I'll carry on with what I'm supposed to talk about. I will probably reiterate many of the same points, which is that cure and cure research is happening in a bigger context, that HIV has been a context of prevention, treatment, addressing poverty. This quote for me speaks to the vulnerable populations, social determinants of health, poverty, stigma, discrimination, injustice, all of those things that are impacting people's ability to access services, people's ability to have healthy, full lives. Those kinds of things impact them. This came from a guidance about prevention research, and one of the points that I will sort of continually drive home along with Jessica is that many of the things that we're hearing about prevention and its rollout, many of the things that we're hearing about treatment and its rollout also apply to how we go about rolling out cure and implementing cure when we have something that is viable beyond just Timothy. So, we have a great opportunity now in that we're still early enough in the work in cure that we can start thinking about those things so that we're not faced with as many of the questions that some of those other things have been faced with. There are models out there about ways to engage community. One, there's a whole set of research practices called community-based participatory research, which is about sort of co-orienting research with the community around social justice issues. It's built on the strength and resiliency of communities and identifying the context in which community exists and the questions that community has. It's building partnerships. It's including community in planning. It's sort of building a research base and a practice that is in partnership with and by community along with the researchers. And that goes from prior to identifying questions to after the research has been disseminated. How do we make sure that the knowledge that we gain from doing research in the community is put back into the community so that they know what's been happening? It's really about sort of exploring cultural humility instead of just having cultural competency, so it's sort of building on those. That frequently, though, with community-based participatory research, we find that researchers will come to a community after an idea has been formed and say, let's build a community-based practice around this question that we have, because we need you to build a question. That's almost too late at that point, because the questions also come from community. Community has questions about this stuff that also can be answered. And so building a partnership where the community has questions, scientists have expertise in figuring out how to answer questions, how do we do that together? So a community-based approach about acting together, really about mobilizing folks in community. It's really about for, by, and with, and not just for. So it's sort of expanding the notion. It's really about how do we sort of flip power and hierarchical bases, because there is really a very visible and clear power structure in the way most research is done. The hierarchy of there's community, there's research, there's the academy, and who sits where on that power structure. And so community-based approaches can flip those around. there's a lot of knowledge in the community that is not necessarily considered expert and that can be mobilized to figure out ways to answer these questions that we have and really empower sort of the communities that we're working with to engage in their health and wellness as well. And having a social justice approach really is about empowering people, it's about empowering communities to take ownership of their health. And it's about social transformation. Just pointed to one of these tools. There are many tools available, many guidance documents out there. Here's just 3 of them. One, recommendations for community engagement in HIV research, good participatory practice, stakeholder engagement toolkits. These have been worked on for many years. There's decades of experience in community and stakeholder engagement in the HIV world that we in Cure can build on. Many of us who are involved in the community side in Cure research have also been involved in all of those movements as well. So capitalizing on the work that's already been done rather than starting to reinvent the wheel, we can take that and carry it forward in the world of Cure research. So the words and boxes there are some key principles that will come up in many of these documents. To point to a local example, here's some pictures from the defeatHIV Community Advisory Board, many of whom are in the room right now. Raise your hands. defeatHIV Community Advisory Board, and we have members of the Community Advisory Boards from the other collaboratories. You can also raise your hands. Here, interspersed throughout. Our local Community Advisory Board has been very, very active in engaging community in different ways. We had an event last night. That's one of many that we've had. Here's some pictures. I want to point out the numbers here. 55,507 what we call engagements with HIV Cure research. That includes both sort of physical live body presence at an event. So people who came to an event like last night's event would be counted as quote unquote live engagements. And then we have our whole online presence that includes Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and all of those, and the reach of those gets extended and extended and extended. And so that's a lot of work and a lot of people who are being engaged in what Cure research is and what it means in the world and how you all are doing the research about it and the science so that we can understand and the community can understand what's happening. If you want to know more about those numbers and what's behind them, come to the poster session. The defeatHIV Community Advisory Board has a poster in the poster session, so you can learn more about that. I also want to point out on a practical note, for those of you who might be applying for the Martin Delaney Collaboratory Cure Research RFA, if you're working on it, there is a section in that about community engagement that is pretty specific about including your plan. So for the practical people, it's also a funding requirement. Not that that's why you should do it, but just to know that that's there as well. Motivation. Right? Extra motivation. So, and I also want to point out that, community, for those of us who have been engaged, we're very willing to have conversations about what this can look like as you're applying for those kinds of things. I want to point out that up at IAS in Vancouver, one of the things that I kept hearing about over and over and over the whole time that I was there was that we really need to be doing more with implementation science. We really need to be thinking more about how social determinants are getting in the way of people's ability to access prevention, how those kinds of things are getting in the way of people's ability to access treatment and care, how we have the tools we need, the knowledge we need to end the epidemic, minus Cure, but in the context of prevention and treatment, we have the tools, and there's lots of things that are getting in the way of rolling those out and people's ability to access those and connect with them. And I kept thinking, we don't really include Cure in those conversations, and we should. Because the reality is, when we have a cure that is feasibly implementable, we're going to have all these barriers. They're going to apply to Cure also. And so we can take the work that's being done in this realm, prevention and treatment, and apply it so that we do the advanced thinking. And I know a lot of times people think about, well, I just do basic lab science and So that's for somebody else. That's for the social scientists to think about. That's for other people later on down the line. And what I would say is you have just as much a role in implementation as anybody else, which is helping advance the knowledge base of the community to understand the science of what you're doing and how that works. And so building partnerships with community to help that knowledge ripple out so that we're not getting things like, well, beeswax will cure it, or those kinds of things that you pointed out this morning. We can do some advanced prep so that when we have a cure, we'll have a much better chance of rolling it out. So I just wanted to throw those up because they were fresh on my mind from IIS very recently. And so to sort of summarize the points that I've been trying to make is that there is a history relating to the HIV response that is an activist history on the community side. And that has to be taken into consideration. There are decades of community engagement experience in the field, like I talked about. There's a diversity of communities. Many of those communities who are impacted are marginalized communities, and so there's extra layers of work to do around empowerment and social justice. There's things to consider about long-term survivors and their role in this research, newly infected people and their role, what the ethics of these trials are going to be as we move from more the lab side of things to more of the bigger clinical trials. We've got lots to think about and work through before then. So we are at the perfect opportunity right now to begin to address the implications of cure. There's lots of them. When I was a young gay boy coming up, we weren't allowed to think about cure. That was not a word we could think about. And so for me to stand next to Timothy Ray Brown and say, this man has been cured, that's a huge paradigm shift for me and the community, right? And so the implications of that are huge, and we need to consider those, along with the regulatory and public health and social and cultural implications as well. And again now, to lay the groundwork to ensure a successful transition from the lab to the clinical trials, and from there to implementation when we're ready for that. Here's some references. And then acknowledgements. The folks at defeatHIV Collaboratory have been swell. And all the members of the defeatHIV Community Advisory Board. Thank you. Yes?
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about community, the HIV positive people, but I actually kind of want to bring it back to the scientific community. You and Jessica have both highlighted the potential role of, a lot of the people even in this room might be basic scientists, and like you say, they might feel that they're a long way removed. But actually, I think there's a larger role even beyond education that they could play, and that is, I think in my experience, scientists across the board really make the assumption that biologically all people are gay white men, and whatever you find in gay white men is going to be applicable to everybody. And so I'm from AMFA, I represent a funder, and we were interested in funding a project to look at sex differences in a cure environment. And I was shocked at how resistant researchers were to even start looking at it. We wanted to give them money, and still they didn't want to look at it. And yet now, John Karn last month presented the first data where the presence of estrogen, he's demonstrated that the presence of estrogen actually makes it harder to reactivate latently infected cells. So now people are interested, and I think if there were an opportunity to get people interested from a biological perspective, and there's lots of reasons to believe that there should be sex differences, the immune system differences between men and women are enormous. But I think actually that's kind of probably a way to get basic scientists interested. So, for those of you who work in the lab with primary cells, like you're trying to knock down or out CCR5 or knock in other genes, and you're looking to see how long are they going to persist, whether that be in culture or in vivo. Like, have you thought about, take some cells from some females versus males and see if they're different? Take some cells from some older people with HIV and younger people from HIV and see if they're different. There is a role to play there. I think if you can get people interested in the biology of it, I think for people who are biology scientists, that's what's going to get them jazzed.
Thank you.
I would also just add that there's product development that could be done at a basic research level. Granted, it's not my area of expertise, but I think back to glycerin in the rectal microbicides and the level of glycerin. It's something that done these formative research consultations in the beginning, perhaps we should think about having a low level of glycerin in your product versus a high level of glycerin and just what people prefer. So even at this basic level, as we begin to think about product and study design, it's a good place to get people interested and to get feedback on what may or may not be something that people are willing to do.
Yes.
I did echo what this lady said. As I was listening to both presentations, I thought about where researchers are today, and I've heard some references that echo, that a researcher doesn't see community, they only see themselves. And if they don't see the community, then they don't see a need to include community. And how do you overcome that barrier? But my main comment I wanted to make was I really appreciate adding community to the conference. And I think it would have been, the most effective conferences are those that include having a presenter that's HIV positive and constantly showing the researchers this is who you're working for.
Well, I think you make a great point, which is that we, as a community, show up at places and keep asking questions and keep talking about the stories behind people. My day job, I work for government, and so we talk about public health and population level and numbers. And I frequently remind people that behind the numbers, behind the number of folks living with the disease or impacted by or at risk for, there's real people. And some of them are in this room. I get to sit in lots of rooms with researchers talking about all of the issues, and I sit there as a queer person on PrEP and listen to the way folks talk about us without realizing that we're there in the room listening. Right? And so just remember, we're there, whether you think we are or not. We're there and paying attention.
Yes. One other comment that I would make is to also think about the aspect of the community that is also looking at the degree of interaction. You could have groups such as this one that is totally science oriented, that we want access to the protocols, to read them ahead of time and be able to influence that. And oftentimes there can be collisions with expectations. Mm-hmm. So to think about those things ahead of time before you actually involve the community might also be helpful.
Right. Particularly as we begin to move towards larger clinical trials, understanding of what people can deal with or go through as participants in the trials, that we're here to help talk about that and work through that and have conversations about it. You have questions, sir?
I just wanted to make a point, sort of as if I had a message as a scientist to the community related to a cure, it would be that the degree to which you suppress your viral, I'm sure you get this message out, but the degree to which you suppress your viral load is the likelihood that you will be cured. The degree to which you suppress your viral load now is the likelihood that you will be cured later. I think most scientists in this room would agree with that. If we're going to cure anybody at all, it's going to be individuals who have done a terrific job suppressing the viral load. And that's why it's likely that more marginalized and economically disadvantaged groups will not be cured as effectively as those who are not.
I think that's the first time I've heard that said so succinctly. So, it's a great message. How are we on?
Let's do two more and then
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to piggyback on what you were saying. I found it really interesting. When I was in Vancouver, I'm new to the care cab, so I'm sort of wrapping my head around here. I come from the treatment side. And we were engaging, and I said that I view cabs as bidirectional, that I bring information, I take information back. And one of the scientists looked at me and said, what information did you carry back? And that was exactly the message I carried back from Vancouver. And I have 8 physicians that work in a private practice, and 2 of them are not treating all of their patients because they think it's their choice, or this person's a long-term non-progressor, they don't need it. And I've hit them with community viral load, I've hit them with all of these arguments. But when I came back from Vancouver, which I only got to attend as a member of this CAB and carried that information back, all 8 of our physicians are now prescribing, and we now have plans in place to get every single patient, regardless of whether they're a long-term non-progressor or lead controller on med. And so I think that's the disconnect. I mean, providers treating this disease don't even know the things that are being presented here by the researchers. And I think that bridge has to be built, because that is a really salient argument for us on the street, for someone who says, why should I take this medication? It's like, well, let me tell you why. Because if the cure is going to come down right now, it's going to come down for people who are on this medication because they've controlled the virus. So I applaud you for saying that, and I think we need more messages like that we can take back to the communities and really show people what not only their tax dollars are paying for, but that there is some progress here, because I think that's the hope that has kept people alive and will keep people alive until we have the moment that we can cure them.
Lori?
So I think that there are a number of things that can be done together. So messages like that, if we have scientists standing up and saying that to regulatory bodies and funding bodies, that's how we can begin to change the standard of care, so that in places like sub-Saharan Africa, where most of the HIV infection actually is, how do we change the standard of care so everybody is protected in sub-Saharan Africa? It's the same access to treatment that we have here in Seattle. And it's when the scientists and the clinicians and the community members, are speaking with a single voice and have a political will to create, to shift the resources. That's how we go about creating the change, so that everybody can be creating, the best viral suppression possible, so that when we have a cure, people are better positioned. And I love that people today were talking about, we've got this thing that right now, cell and gene therapy is not going to be immediately affordable and accessible, but we can be thinking about, all right, how do we create this in a stable way that doesn't require the technology that we have? And so having that partnership is a way of building trust. I think it's breaking down silos. You don't have a clinical track and a pre-science track and a social science track. It all needs to be integrated, because each one has to inform the other. And right now, before we're in a lot of clinical trials, is a good time to be doing the social science acceptability work and building the community understanding, and we can be doing that right now, so that we know, well, what is acceptable and not acceptable to people who are going to want to enroll, and what are the misconceptions we need to clear up, and what are the ethical issues we need to struggle with together, so that we'll be able to accrue people quickly when it's time to have a trial, and we have a trial that's acceptable to the people who are going to need to be in it. So I think that there's a lot we can do in partnership right now with each other.
Thank you.